he'll be Egypt's next president, but a low voter turnout deprives Abdel Fattah el-Sisi of the huge popular mandate that he'd hoped for. So, what message was sent by the electorate? Is Sisi's credibility now in question? And how will he cope with Egypt's many problems? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. In Doha, I'm Adrian Finnegan. Nearly all the votes are counted in Egypt, and Abdel Fattah el-Sisi says that he's won, beating his sole opponent with more than 92% of the vote. But his victory was tempered by a pitiful turnout, despite voting being extended for a third day on Wednesday this week. Sisi says that 44% of Egypt's 53 million eligible voters cast their ballots, far fewer than he'd hoped and well below the 53% who voted for Mohamed Morsi. So what does this mean for his legitimacy as the new president of Egypt? We'll be discussing that with my guests here in the studio in just a moment, after this report from Al Jazeera's Omar Al-Saleh.
The official winner hasn't been announced yet, but these Egyptians are already celebrating. Preliminary results released by the government suggest that former army chief Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has won the presidential elections with more than 90% of the vote. Al Jazeera, which is banned from reporting in Egypt, cannot independently verify the figure. But that didn't matter to Sisi's supporters.
We are very happy. It means the whole world for us. We will stand by him and support him, even if we didn't eat or drink, because we love Egypt.
The Election Commission says counting is still underway and the final results will not be announced before next week. The original two-day poll started on Monday and was overshadowed by a low voter turnout. Election officials blamed it on a heat wave and extended it a third day. There are around 50 million registered voters. An official at the Election Commission says more than 40% of people voted, while the opposition alliance, which includes the outlawed Muslim Brotherhood, insists that less than 10% of voters showed up. Again, Al Jazeera cannot confirm this. Sisi led the coup against Egypt's first elected civilian president and wanted millions of people to vote for him. His critics say he needs a high turnout to legitimize his military takeover. These elections also highlighted a boycott by the young people who led the revolution that deposed Hosni Mubarak. The result was never in doubt. Many people considered Sisi a president in waiting. But people in Egypt remain divided, and that could be a recipe for more unrest. Omar Al-Saleh, Al Jazeera.
All right, let's bring in my guests today on the programme. All of them are with me here in Doha for a change. Omar Ashur, senior lecturer in Middle East politics at the University of Exeter. Abdul Mawgood Dardiri, who's a former member of the Egyptian Parliament and member of the Freedom and Justice Party. And Tariq Massoud, an associate professor of public policy at Harvard University. Gentlemen, welcome. Omar Ashur, 46% of the 53 million people who were eligible to vote participated in this election, fewer than half. Does that give Sisi a legitimate mandate to govern?
It does not. In many ways, it undermines his legitimacy between quotations of that elections. The main problem is that Egyptians, the significant percentage that does not vote to begin with, in 2012, it was a different environment, free and fair, and there was optimism because of the revolution. And we saw only 26.5 million showing up out of a 51 million, so around 52% or so. Now, this is a very different environment. That's an environment where major political parties were ousted, where these elections were held against a backdrop of severe crackdowns, brutal crackdowns, unprecedented in Egypt's modern history. We're talking about in 7 hours, more than 900 people killed in August 2013. And in addition to that, you have an idea of pessimism and worry about what's going on. And in this context, and pretty much it was a foregone result. No credible commentator would tell you that there was some serious electoral competition going on. So in that case, the apathy is well explained and well expected. I think what will happen later, this is a president that will come without a parliament there, and with a government that he appointed to a certain degree. And at the moment, I think on one hand, this issue of legitimacy will play along not just by the opposition, but even within factions within the regime who would tell him that, you remember the lower turnout that happened.
Yeah, okay. Dr. Dadiri, this 44, 46% then suggests there is a much larger group of people in the population in Egypt who refuse to legitimize his presidency and hand power once again to another military man.
If we were to believe those numbers,
Right.
we're questioning those numbers. In all elections, there are winners and losers. The real losers in this election are both Mr. Sisi and Mr. Sabahi. They really lost the credibility. The real winners are the Egyptian people, the majority of the Egyptian people who boycotted that election because they did not believe in it. And it is very surprising to us, even as members of the Freedom and Justice Party. Really, the majority of the Egyptian people surprised the whole world. There was an expectation, the whole world was told there were 33 million people in the streets in support of Sisi. Where are they? Did they evaporate in the summer of Egypt, or did they travel somewhere else? We were told that Sisi is so loved in Egypt that he's going to win more than what Morsi did. Where did they go? Why did Egyptians? That's an important question for political scientists to study and for psychologists to study, for so many experts to study. Why didn't the Egyptian welcome, as they were told by the media, by the Egyptian fascist media, that this is the turnout going to be, this is how it ended? What is unique about what happened in the past 3 days is what the majority of Egyptian people did, they debunked many myths. Number one is they debunked the 33 million who walked in the streets to support Sisi. Number two, that Sisi is very popular. Number three, that so-called political Islam disappeared from Egypt. What we see now is very different from what we were told. And according to the recent, the Egypt Center for the Study of the Media and Public Opinion, about 10% of Egyptians participated in this election. And this is what we have now. Okay. This is not likely to give Mr. Sisi any mandate to govern the country after that.
Well, let's put that to Tariq Masood. Can we trust that 44, 46% figure that's been given about the number of people who actually voted in this election? And to what extent is the low voter turnout Sisi's own fault? He refused to campaign. He didn't put out any sort of manifesto. He didn't set out what he was going to do if he won the presidency. Was he too arrogant?
Well, those are great questions, Adrian. I think that I really can't weigh in on whether or not the turnout figures that are being published by the higher presidential election commission are real or not. I have no a priori reason to doubt them. If you look, for example, at the figures that have been released and you kind of compare turnout in this election to vote share for President Morsi in June of 2012, we see an interesting negative relationship. We see places that really had voted for President Morsi in large numbers in 2012 actually didn't turn out to vote this time. And this is with the regime's own numbers. And that suggests to me, using the regime's own numbers, that lots of people did view this election as a kind of referendum on what happened with the overthrow of Morsi and the political path since then. So I'm not sure that there's reason to doubt these numbers. They're pretty low and they're pretty embarrassing regardless. Now, the bigger question of the mandate that you bring up, look, at the end of the day, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's mandate to rule and his credibility as a ruler doesn't derive from how many people vote for him in elections. And in fact, that's almost never been the case in Egypt, right? Hosni Mubarak in the 2005 election got a little more than 6 million people to vote for him, and yet nobody said that, he suddenly had no mandate. I mean, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's mandate comes from the fact that he sat at the top of the most powerful institution in Egypt, which is the army, and his international credibility comes from the fact that he is now the leader of the largest and most important country in the Arab world. And so I think you will find that this election result maybe scratched him up a little bit, maybe diminishes the aura of invincibility and inevitability around the but I don't think it changes anything fundamental about the political calculus in Egypt right now.
Okay, Omar Ashur, what message, if any, taking up from moving on from what Tariq was saying, what message will Sisi take from this relatively low voter turnout? The figure, of course, the accuracy, the veracity of that figure, still debatable. I mean, there was a huge media campaign in Egypt prior to this vote, and that just failed to materialise in people casting their ballots.
I think, as Tariq mentioned, the idea of how many people voted to begin with will not exactly be the only pillar of his rule. I think he will govern mainly through institutions and mainly through the security and the military institutions. The presidency as an institution, I think, has been undermined. You know, even if presidency under Nasser, under Sadat, and under Mubarak, and under President Morsi, all of it was, yes, populated by military men and ex-military men, but it acted as an independent institution that governed, that was above the military, that was above the Ministry of Interior, and that was above the general intelligence. But right now, I think what's happening is that we're seeing a president ousted in 2012 by the military, another president that was ousted in 2013, again by the military, which is President Morsi, and then a president in 2013, 2014, appointed by the military general, which is the current Adli Mansour. So in this context, it gives extreme dominance to the military institution. And what you have, because they're all equal heads, all the generals in the SCAF, some of them are even older than General Sisi. Now he is, I think, what's happening is that he became their representative in the presidential palace, and therefore you will see a presidency that is always going back to the military establishment, asking what's the decision, and then implementing these policies.
Okay, I want to take that point further in just a moment. First, a little background on the new President Sisi, the most powerful man in Egypt. Now, during the Mubarak era, he served as a military attaché in Saudi Arabia. In February 2011, when the military council took power after the fall of Mubarak, he was appointed head of military intelligence. He went on to become General Commander of the Armed Forces. He was also appointed Defence Minister in Mohamed Morsi's government. Sisi is also known for his close relationship with the US military. Dr. Dariri, is Sisi his own man? We were hearing just then that perhaps he isn't. Is he just a continuation of Mubarak era power? I mean, already it seems that past cronies from the Mubarak era are already gaining influence and positions of power again in Egypt. Or does it go further than that? Is he the military's man?
Sisi looks like no more than Mubarak new version 2014. And he does serve both as a military man and also as trying to bring Mubarak's era back to the Egyptian politics. From a political standpoint, the opposition, the national coalition, the anti-coup pro-democracy national coalition is very much empowered by the boycott, by the majority of Egyptian people boycotting the election. And we're going to remain peacefully in the streets. We're going to demand the bringing democracy back on track. We do not recognize this election. We do not even call it an election. And that's why you will see lots of people tomorrow and after, next week and next month, are going to the streets to demand democracy back on track.
Okay, we'll wait to see if that happens. Tariq Massoud, do you agree with that? What will Egypt look like under Mubarak? As a military man, of course, he has no political party to answer to. He won't be hostage to any political considerations. Is that a good or a bad thing for his leadership and for Egypt?
Let me note the Freudian slip in your question, Adrian, and you said Mubarak, not Sisi.
Forgive me, forgive me. Thank you for pointing it out.
But I think it's a valid question, and the slip behind the question is a completely understandable one, because somebody like Sisi with the military background certainly does harken back to the days of Mubarak and Sadat and Abdel Nasser and even Mohammed Naguib, all military men who had ruled Egypt, and it feels like a regression back to that standard operating procedure in Egypt. At the same time, I do think that Egypt has changed quite a bit. So for example, just to give you an illustration of how much Egypt has changed, think about this election. When turnout didn't seem to be very healthy, what did the decision makers do? They didn't just shut down the polling stations as agreed on the second day and then announce some wildly inflated figure of 90% turnout. they were forced to keep the polls open for another day. In other words, they couldn't lie outright. And I think the reason they couldn't is because the Egyptian people have changed. They've changed utterly and fundamentally. And so going back to the days of hard authoritarianism, I don't think is in the cards. And so the question now you ask, how is Sisi going to rule? I think Dr. Ashur mentioned early on, Sisi does come to power without a parliament. And in fact, there is some reason to believe constitutionally that when Sisi comes to power, he will certainly have the executive authority as the elected president, but he may also have the legislative authority. And so if both legislative and executive authority are vested in Sisi, then he has the power to issue laws willy-nilly without any kind of oversight or veto from anybody. And we'll see what he uses that power for. We'll see how quickly he decides to relinquish that power in the form of holding parliamentary elections. And then finally, we'll see who gets elected to that parliament. The biggest political party in Egypt, the Freedom and Justice Party of the Muslim Brotherhood, is obviously not participating. I think that many political parties that had participated in the past may be rethinking their participation. And so the political landscape in Egypt going forward is, there's a high degree of uncertainty and unknowability.
Omar, sure. Will Sisi be wise, savvy enough to open up to the people that he clamped down on before becoming president, especially the youth of the country, of course, who were so instrumental in the 2011 revolution?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are two ways to go here. There is the eradicator way or the dialogist way. And we saw that in every case where we saw a coup staged against a democratically elected institution or a democratic process. What happens afterwards is that once the regime is a bit consolidated, a bit has some confidence, it needs a way to maintain the social cohesion, politically demobilize all of its opposition. And what it usually gives is a specific segment of freedom or a margin of freedom that they can play within, but also this margin of freedom gets controlled. So you may see this, but also I think there are hawks in the security establishment specifically, and in the military establishment, especially in the staff. And many of them believe that was a mistake done in 2011. They believe that Field Marshal Tantawi was too nice and too lenient on the opposition. And their belief is that if we crack down hard, now we eradicate them, and in a term that was used, bury them once and for all. So you have this power struggle within the factional divide, within the military establishment, intelligence establishment, and security establishment.
But you can't eradicate the opposition, can you, Dr. Dari? The Muslim Brotherhood, whether Sisi likes it or not, is still a major political force, enjoys huge support
But it is
across the
really
country.
more than the Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay.
The opposition is impossible to eradicate 2/3 or 1/3 of the Egyptian population.
Do you think that Sisi will be wise enough to reach out to his political opponents, political Islam opponents?
Our experience in Egypt that the military, when they are in power, they're not that wise to bring people to the table and the discussion. But let us not forget that bringing back the worst version of Mubarak into Egypt now after 3 years of revolution is also bringing the revolutionary spirit. Just very few days before the election took place, there was a statement came out of Cairo called Cairo Declaration, inviting all revolutionary forces to come together so that the revolution can go on. I expect that Sisi's rule is not going to be stable. I expect the people in the streets are not going to let him, because he killed so many Egyptians. He's putting in prison more than 25,000 Egyptians in prison. How can we expect someone like this to rule over Egyptians, especially with such a low turnout? Especially the young people are not attracted to his campaign or to his future.
Well, by his own admission, Sisi has many challenges ahead of him. Egypt has a national debt, for instance, of $240 billion. High unemployment and a huge budget deficit mean the economy will have to be top of his agenda. Sisi also faces a considerable challenge from, as we were hearing there, the Muslim Brotherhood. Though outlawed now, they remain the country's most organized political force. Then there's the issue of the military and what their role will be and their influence in Sisi's Egypt. And of course, he'll have to deal with the human rights abuses, corruption, and a legal system that's seen by some as unfair. Tariq Masood, picking up from what Dr. Dariri was saying just a moment or two ago, what will Mubarak's priorities be when he actually gets down to the business of running the country? Democracy, political reform, the economy, given the fact that we've got this new context, the revolution in Egypt, there's an appetite for change. People are not going to be very tolerant if he gets it wrong, are they?
Well, that's a very good question. I'll note again, you said Mubarak,
but sorry.
I would say, I think your question, Adrian, is an excellent one. What will his priorities be? I think if you were to take 50 experts on Egypt and ask them what should his priorities be, 49 of them would probably say the economy. Egypt, as you noted, has severe economic problems that it has to deal with, high unemployment, particularly among the youth, who seemed, by the way, to have sat this election out. And it has a huge budget crunch because of its massive subsidies program, which incidentally the outgoing government is now making noises about canceling finally. So these are huge challenges that any president, whether it was Sisi or anybody else, would have to face, and they will almost invariably require tough decisions that will erode his popularity. The question with el-Sisi, and the reason we don't really know what Sisi would do, is because I think as a couple of our guests noted early on, he was not actually very specific during the campaign period. He didn't really do a whole lot of appearances. He didn't release very detailed political programs. And part of that is I think he didn't want to get cornered into making any promises that he couldn't keep. But the other reason for that is because he was really running as a national security candidate, as somebody who is going to restore order. And so all of the signals he's been sending is not that he's going to soften and that he's going to readmit the Muslim Brotherhood into the political process, etc. The signals he's been sending seem to be quite the opposite, that he's going to come with a very firm hand and put an end to any of these protests that are leading to uncertainty.
Omar Ashur, how does Sisi bring international legitimacy to his presidency? The African Union, for instance, the US, the relationship with America?
I think he has to play a very difficult game to get that. On the one hand, he is playing also the flag of national security, basically telling them that I can provide security. There is a low-level insurgency going on in Sinai that targets Israel and that targets some of the military establishments. And therefore, if you want to support me, you need to keep on the assistance from the US coming in for that specific campaign. And plus the original assistance that he gets from the United States. And he sends the same message to the EU, and he plays a lot the idea of look at Libya, look at Syria, or he talks about the foreign fighters. He gets usually the stats and the map of foreign fighters extremely wrong. But he sends this messages that I am against all this, and this is how he wants to endear himself to the West via this security channel. But he has some very strong regional patrons. He has, it's not a secret that Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates perceive the status quo as favorable for their interests, and they are anti this idea of change and revolution, whether reformist or not, and they will back him regardless of his rhetoric.
Yeah, Dr. Dariri, I mean, to what extent does that international support from some very rich Arab neighbours mean that Sisi could be there for quite a while?
Let's talk about the international support on two levels. The level one is the regional level. The second level is the international level. It depends very much. The fact that this pleasant surprise to the whole world, the low turnout of Egyptians going to the poll is very telling that Egyptians are not supporting Sisi, that Egyptians are not supporting the military. Now, there is a chance, a second chance now, to both regional countries that if they plan to support the military suppressing and killing Egyptians in the streets, this is likely to go on for years to come. And I don't know if they can remain supporting Sisi for years to come. The question now is to Europe and the United States. Will Europe and the United States come back and realize that they made a mistake by either being silent about the coup or supporting the coup behind the doors? It is really a strong moment in the historical relationship between EU and the United States to re-evaluate the relationship with the military, and that the military is not the best to serve their interests. Their best interest is to be served through democracy, rule of law, and human rights.
All right, Tariq, Masood, we've got about a minute left. I just, by way of an end to the programme, I wonder if you can explain for us the apparent fondness in Egypt for military leaders. OK, it's arguable about the support that Sisi got during this election, but is it strength, is it stability, is it law and order, is it something in the Egyptian mentality?
I don't think so. I think that, we've been talking a lot about the Egyptian military as if it's this failed institution, the boot on the necks of the Egyptian people. But in reality, the legacy is much more complex. Egyptian males engage in military service. People have personal experiences of this military that aren't all bad. If I could just respond very quickly to something Dr. Dedeiri said.
Very briefly.
Basically, everybody has to take a lesson from Egypt in the last, and events in Egypt in the last year. Sisi certainly has to take the lesson that maybe his popularity isn't as high as it was, but the Muslim Brotherhood and political opponents also have to take the lesson that millions of Egyptians are happy with what has happened. And so just as Sisi has to be wise in reaching out to political opponents, so too do Islamists and others have to be wise in accepting that.
All right, many thanks indeed. Gentlemen, I'm afraid we'll have to end the discussion there. Thank you for joining me, Omar Ashur, Abdul Dari, and Tariq Masood. Please do let us know your thoughts. You can join in our discussion online at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can tweet us at AJ Inside Story on Twitter. In Doha, I'm Adrian Finnegan. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again. Bye for now.